before you begin on a fiction book, you always start with a big idea. Okay, so the big idea is basically the main lesson. At the end of the day, great is in the experiencer of that art, and books are no different. And Jordan Peterson talks about a novel or a story is truer than true, right? Meaning that there's some meta truth underlying so just because it's not technically nonfiction, just because it's not technically true, just because it's not a science book, doesn't mean that it's not invoking or touching on something that's even deeper, right? These big questions like, why are we here? What should we do? What's the nature of reality? What is love? What is beauty, aesthetics, right? These like deep philosophical questions. There's usually something that you're going to want to say as an artist, as a writer, especially a fiction. There's some lesson, if you will, right? And without this lesson, the story is going to fall a little flat, right? Even think about what do you guys think? There's no right answer. What do you think is like the genre of books or movies that is sort of the simplest to understand? It has the simplest and kind of most obvious big idea every single time. What's your guess? Anyone have any idea? Wrong answers are good. There actually really is no wrong answers. It's just an opinion. Okay, everyone's being shy. So I would say action. Okay, nice. Not really zoned out. Is really the simplest one. Okay, so what is action? Ultimately, is good overcomes evil. Of any action adventure, right? There's a good guy, there's a bad guy, and good overcomes evil. Okay, so that's would be the big idea, or a big idea could be love resolve, or the big idea could be forgiveness over revenge, or something like that. Right? You want to come up with that, and then you're going to want to choose your genre, because every genre has a couple tropes, right? Some kind of fill in the blanks that are necessary. Like if it's a murder mystery, one of the first couple lessons has to be that there's a murder, right? There's usually a dead body. If you don't have that in the story, then it's not really a murder mystery, right? If it's a romantic book, whether it's romance or romantic comedy, there has to be girls that meet each other, and it's they don't necessarily like each other right away, but then so this is often called the inciting incident of a romance is called a meet cute. So these types are based on the genre. So you want to choose the genre. Then you want to choose a setting. The most difficult of this would be science fiction or fantasy, because you have to create the setting from nothing. You have to do some world building. Then you want to start with your protagonist. Who is my protagonist? And the only thing that really matters about your protagonist goal is. Okay, so all of the and how big they are, and just how old they are, like none of that really matters as much. If you've ever watched a movie or read a book that kind of feels flat, it's usually because you don't have a deep desire to see them reach that goal, or the goal isn't clear enough. Okay. Have an antagonist. Antagonist is obviously like the villain, or the thing that's holding them reaching the goal. And you want to have an external antagonist and an internal antagonist. So internal antagonist is basically the thing that's wrong with them that they need to overcome. It's some vice that they have. An alcoholic. It could be they have to get over trauma. They have to forgive. They're too stoic. They're whatever it may be. And then the external antagonist is the thing in the world, whether it's a person or a rule or a law or a corporation, or depending, it's a little bit different. That's holding. It could be the family in a romance, right? The family love. Some external problem. You want to have ultimately the macro learning, which is kind of like the big in a particular, right? So it's like the big idea is let's say. You have to overcome your fears, and be courageous when it's difficult, if you want to live your purpose in your life, something like that. That'd be like the big idea, right? And so the macro learning would be the actual thing that the protagonist has to do that represents that. Okay, and then the micro learning is usually the opposite of the internal antagonist. Okay, so whatever their vice is, they have to overcome that vice and turn it into a virtue. Cool. So you got to kind of do this. In one sense, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and it's good if they have, Jack, that's right. It's good if they have a different belief system, right? So there's some core fundamental belief. Like you see this in Marvel, the antagonist usually believes they're kind of a nihilist, right? And they believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with the world, and therefore, humanity should be either killed or reduced, or they have some like weird value structure that's against what the protagonist believes. And so these ideas, these big ideas, will manifest themselves in physical action throughout the book. But really, we're talking any great work of art or any great story is really wrestling with these big philosophical ideas. And if you don't have these big philosophical ideas underlying the book, it usually gets kind of boring. Okay. I recently heard that the first thing Disney does is kill the matriarch. Oh yeah, that's funny. Yeah, Disney's the champion of a lot of these story structures. One interesting thing to do to note, you probably heard this before, but just to reiterate, as you're building your story structure, this is always begin, right? Like, what's the big idea? What's the genre, setting, protagonist, goal? Like, you cannot start the book really without this. Now, some people, maybe you're more kind of a jazz musician writer and you're just going to kind of flow and whatever comes up, comes up. That's great. But if you do that, then you better be one of the best writers in the world at a sentence by sentence basis. Okay. That's just like, it's just full stop. If you're going to just kind of roll with the punches and let things kind of flow like a jazz musician, and the story isn't really congruent or coherent, then every third paragraph, there should be a sentence that people want to tattoo on their body. That's how profound and good the word for word writing needs to be. Okay. And the greatest literature does both. Just to be clear, like we'll get into this in a second, but like literary fiction, something that wins a Nobel Prize or something wins a Pulitzer Prize, what it does is it combines a Venn diagram of both. You have just absolutely world-class writing that's particular to a style, that has a very strong voice, and simultaneously it has an amazing story. So probably the best example of this is something like The Great Gatsby, right? It's like this classic, love story. It's got revenge. It's class structure and good versus evil, and it's a very juicy book. But then the word for word, if you type in quotes from The Great Gatsby, there's like 100 quotes that are worthy of poetry, right? So that's often why it's considered one of the best great American novels. Okay, I'm gonna go through kind of fast here because I'm gonna send this to you guys later. But now you want to pick an outline structure. Okay, so once you have the basics, okay, then you want to come up with an outline structure. There's different structures for how you're going to approach this, but there's the obvious 3-act structure. So in the beginning of the 3-act structure, you're kind of setting everything up. I know what the goal is. I know what the antagonist is. I go to the new world. Some setup, and then there's going to be the actual kind of journey and all of the complexities of their story. And then at the end, there's going to be a resolution. Did they win? Did they reach their goal? If not, why not? All of that. So that's kind of the basic 3-act structure, right? A more detailed version of this is the hero's journey. We'll get into that in a second. The Snowflake method. Does any of you guys use these methods, or have any? These are just some of my favorite ones. The Snowflake method is when you don't have necessarily everything built out, but you're kind of using mind mapping to extend what you do have into a larger story. The Save the Cat, this is a little bit more obvious for screenplay writing, but novelists can learn a lot from screenplay writing as well. This is more how to write an individual beats within the scene. And so the Save the Cat, just to be clear, in summary, is just to say that every single sub-beat of the larger chapter has to be, remember we talked about last week, this like fractal idea, where everything has to be, there has to be a mini goal with a mini antagonism within every beat, within every chapter. Okay, so it's really, instead of, for example, this happened, then this happened, it's this happened and therefore this happened, or this happened, but this happened, which made them do this, or this happened, and because of that, then this happened. Did you notice the difference there? You can't just say this, that's boring, right? There has to be a cause and effect, even within the meta structure of every single chapter. And so Save the Cat is kind of teaching you how to do that. And then the story circle is really kind of the hero's journey, but in a circular format. And what you do is you turn the hero's journey into a circle, and then where you're missing pieces, you can kind of fill in the gaps more obviously. Okay, so we'll get into this in more detail later, but I just want to give you guys some general outlines. And then the hero's journey is kind of the classic. I like to start there. This, I don't know if everyone's really familiar with this, but this is almost every major story has some version of this. So you have the ordinary world and the ordinary protagonist. I'm in my situation right now. Then there's a call to adventure. This usually is some kind of inciting incident, and they either have to move locations, or they have to change who they are, or they're put in a weird circumstances that's very different from their normal life. And in this call to adventure, that's where you understand their goal, right? So something changes. We find out what their goal is. There's an inciting incident. In the beginning, they don't want to be the hero. They don't want to meet the guy. They don't want to meet the girl. They don't want to take the case. There's something that's happening in their personal life that's holding them back. There's some reason why they're. This is where you get the internal goal, right? The internal problem. So this is kind of like the external problem, and then the refusal is where you introduce the internal problem. Okay. Then you usually have a mentor. The mentor can be in the form of a guidebook. It can be a physical person. It could be memories. It could be their father. It could be, it doesn't really matter, but there's some larger thing that's helping them throughout. Then crossing the threshold. This is kind of like where they finally decide, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to reach this goal. Before that, they were kind of fighting it. Then 6 is kind of Hercules, right? So there's a series of trials, and just like a video game, the trials get more and more intense and more personal usually. And then this approach to the inmost cave, this is where the thing that's really holding them back is their internal. So they have to struggle with their own internal vice and kind of overcome that. Because they can overcome that, then they can win the macro ordeal in the real world. And then they win something, whether it's knowledge, or they win the race, or they figure out the case, or there's something either physical or mental or psychological, or even spiritual, that they gain. And because they gained that thing, then they can go back full circle and help their community. They return with the elixir, and then everyone's better off for it. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting way of approaching. This is very basic level, but again, if you go through your current book or your current idea and make sure that every single one of these has is checked off, the box is checked off, then it's going to be a lot. The story's going to be so much better, firstly, and then instead of you just kind of like spinning out in your head thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Where do I go next? You can really connect the dots if you have the outline. And when in doubt, always go back to the big idea. Like, what are we really trying to say here? And the more precise you can be with the big idea, the better.